the Soviet Union collapsed more than 32 years ago and left America as the last superpower standing in a world order designed around it, this Pax Americana is quickly unraveling at the seams and leaving our world order hanging by a thread. As China ascended and Russia rose once more, America grew complacent in its place at the top and was made to feel secure through mere diplomatic agreements, all while the world changed around it. Now, as events have unfolded, we see that all at the top are faltering, and America is much more secure than Russia and China. Or are we? Welcome to Hanging by a Thread, where we delve deep into the complex issues shaping our world today and tomorrow. I'm your host, Grayden Mitchell, and we'll be discussing a variety of critical topics that are redefining the global landscape, from the decline of traditional superpowers like Russia, China, and the United States, to the emergence of new and influential players on the international stage. We'll be exploring the factors behind these shifts and the potential implications for the future world order. Additionally, we'll examine some of the ever-simmering tensions worldwide and which one is, at least in my opinion, most likely to boil over. Our analysis will be thorough, drawing on demographic trends, economic developments, natural resources, international alliances, and potential future trajectories to provide a comprehensive understanding of the changing global dynamics. Remember, however, that geopolitics can change completely in just a matter of minutes, and the predictions made here today could be entirely moot by tomorrow, for better or for worse. So, on that note, sit back and get ready for an informative and thought-provoking conversation about the forces shaping our world and what we might expect in the coming decades. First off, we'll be discussing a fascinating and timely topic: the decline of the three global superpowers, Russia, China, and the United States. We'll examine the specific reasons behind their decline and the potential impact on the world order. Let's start with Russia. The decline of Russian power can be attributed to a combination of economic, demographic, and political factors. Economically, Russia has struggled to diversify its economy and remains heavily reliant on its oil and gas exports. The recent volatility in global energy markets has exposed the vulnerability of Russia's economy to external shocks and has limited its ability to invest in the development of its other industries. The country's over-reliance on hydrocarbon revenues has also contributed to the persistence of corruption and a lack of economic competitiveness. This, in turn, has stifled innovation and technological progress, further hindering Russia's efforts to modernize its economy and boost its global influence. This issue of over-reliance has been impacted significantly by Western sanctions on Russian energy exports. While at first many had predicted a near-total collapse of the Russian energy sector and a partial economic collapse, and therefore a collapse of the war effort in Ukraine, Russia proved to be remarkably quick in finding other buyers such as China, India, and Pakistan to pick up the slack. These countries provide a lifeline to Russia that almost definitely won't go away anytime soon, as their unquenchable thirst for oil and hunger for coal is driven by growing, developing populations and aging infrastructure that make Russia the best source of energy by far. Not to mention Russia's influence in the region as a massive arms exporter and military supplier. Demographically, Russia is also facing significant challenges, including an aging population, low birth rates, and a shrinking workforce. Problems that can be seen not just in Russia, but across many countries in the world as a whole. These trends in Russia have serious implications for the country's long-term economic growth and social stability. The Russian government has implemented various policies to encourage population growth, such as offering financial incentives to families with multiple children, but it remains to be seen whether these efforts will be sufficient to reverse the negative demographic trends. Russia's population has received blow after blow, with tens of millions dead from wars and famines over the decades since the Soviet Union was founded. Although the population growth had proved resilient then, with slow yet stable increases after sudden declines from the catalyst events, for example World War II or the Ukrainian famine, the loss of the sizable populations contained in the former Soviet republics has severely hampered Russia's ability to regenerate its population base. Politically, Russia's autocratic political system and its use of aggressive foreign policy tactics have contributed significantly to its decline on the global stage. The country's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its support for separatist movements in eastern Ukraine have led to international condemnation and economic sanctions, which have further isolated Russia and weakened its economy. The invasion of Ukraine in 2022 even further isolated Russia and destroyed all hopes for a Russia that was willing to work with the West, something that many EU nations, Germany in particular, had been working towards for decades. The past year has almost erased all European dependency on Russia instead of paralyzing European decision-making as was intended. Russia's sphere of influence is now permanently shifted out of mainland Europe, with the exception of Belarus, to focus on the Caucasus and Central Asia. Moreover, Russia's intervention in the Syrian civil war and its interference in the domestic politics of other countries have deepened tensions with the West and have raised concerns about the Kremlin's intended place in their plans for a new world order and just how far they are willing to go to achieve it. While additional direct military action outside of Ukraine is unlikely, as the US and world as a whole would likely not tolerate this, as it would also probably force China and Russia to be alienated. More covert Cold War style actions such as funding insurgencies, opposition parties, and even regime changes in unstable or developing countries is not only likely but ongoing. In the cyber domain, Russia has been accused of engaging in cyber warfare and disinformation campaigns aimed at disrupting democratic processes and sowing division among its adversaries, as well as targeting specific commercial entities and pieces of critical infrastructure. These activities have further tarnished Russia's image and have eroded its international image of trust, albeit with the benefit of showing off to the world how advanced both their technological capabilities are, but also how advanced their sociological manipulation tactics are as well. Russia's military has been on the decline since the end of the Soviet Union, losing massive amounts of manpower, equipment, industry, and facilities to former Soviet nations. Investments to rebuild to full capacity, expensive to begin with, were sidelined in favor of increasing energy production and exports. Additionally, the image of the massive Soviet war machine still remained alive in the minds of many Russians and people around the world, leading to a sense of complacency and a lack of urgency for needed modernization, expansion, and a replenishment of stockpiles. Although funding has increased significantly since the annexation of Crimea as Putin prepared for an invasion of Ukraine, it takes longer than the 8 years that he had to reverse the decades of decline that were already there. Despite these challenges, Russia remains a formidable military power, and its nuclear arsenal, which is the largest in the world, ensures that it will continue to be a significant player in global security affairs at the very least. However, the country's long-term prospects for maintaining its status as a true, bona fide superpower are uncertain, given its many economic and demographic vulnerabilities, albeit fixable. Soon, it may be reduced to a superpower in name only, and without any of the economic or influence benefits that come with it. An echo of its former self, yet still bearing the associated prestige and might that comes with both the name Russia and having over 6,000 nuclear weapons. Next, let's explore China. The decline of Chinese power is a more nuanced and contested issue, as the country continues to experience rapid economic growth and has emerged as a major player in global affairs. Nevertheless, there are several factors that may limit China's rise and even contribute to its decline. China, some of its strengths are its weaknesses, and some of its weaknesses are its strengths. First off, China's economic growth has been slowing down in recent years, partially due to the country's transition from a manufacturing-based economy to one that is more focused on services and consumption. This slowdown has raised questions about the sustainability of China's growth model and its ability to maintain its current trajectory. For a long time, China grew so fast because it was industrializing for the first time and didn't already have the 100 plus years of economic buildup like, for example, the US, Britain, or Germany had already had. Its enormous population provided almost infinite labor for the kind of quick, cheap, yet effective growth that developing countries usually have. However, now that China has been industrializing for close to 60 years now, much of that untapped potential has now been tapped, and its population has just shrunk for the first time ever. Unlike 60 years ago, there just simply aren't hundreds of millions of peasants wanting to move to cities anymore, and most industry that can be outsourced from the West to China already has been, and in fact, some countries are moving back or even outsourcing to other, even poorer countries in a cruel twist of fate. China still has tremendous potential, yes, but it is running out of the potential that developing nations have, a system that the leadership has been slow to abandon until recently. If it wants to keep growing, China must stop basing itself off of primarily growing through manufacturing and instead through sectors such as information technology and consumer-driven spending. This is what presents an impossible question to China's leadership, as communist countries just weren't designed to operate in an economy like this, because communism was there long before an economy like this was invented. While Beijing has significantly opened up its economy to capitalist-style methods, it isn't willing to go any farther. It still maintains a stranglehold on the economy and economic planning, and Beijing has even started reversing some of the economic measures that it views as too Western, despite the fact that it was they themselves that implemented it. They are trying to do an over course correction for their own course correction. Chinese communism is only working right now because the party is making it work. They are doing whatever needs to be done, whatever, dirty tricks, backhand deals, or just simply changing the rules to ensure that the Chinese model of communism works now and will continue to work. Because an admission that it doesn't work will be an admission that the party has not only failed China and the Chinese people, but that their entire regime has been built upon a lie. This is not an option for the would-be Emperor Xi Jinping. Second off, China is also grappling with a number of internal challenges that could undermine its stability and future growth prospects. These challenges include a rapidly aging population, growing income inequality, and rising social tensions. By 2100, China could lose half of its population. This means all those houses, apartments, and even entire cities that China had built for its expanding population will now be rendered useless. Villages will be abandoned, cities will grow quiet, and tens of millions of empty buildings will crumble as they sit vacant and neglected. Factories will close, businesses relocate, and services outsourced, as hundreds of millions of jobs that had existed will now be left with no one to fill them. If that estimated figure is indeed correct, then China is in a dire position and must take immediate action to prevent as much damage as possible. A population decline of this magnitude, decades in the making, cannot be stopped, and has in fact already started, with 2022 being the first year that Chinese population had declined, more than a decade earlier than expected, and India is now poised to overtake China as the world's most populous nation during the summer or fall of 2023, if not already. Additionally, the country's massive debt levels, particularly in its corporate and local governmental sectors, pose a significant risk to its financial stability. The debt level in its real estate market, particularly, is absolutely unprecedented, With a total of over $450 billion in debt, this sector has been building, building, and building for decades and only now realize that no one is buying anymore. Compounded by a now shrinking population, the crucial real estate sector must look in the mirror and rebuild itself from the ground up if it wants to survive the coming demographic storm. Third, China's increasingly assertive foreign policy has generated extreme pushback from other countries and has raised concerns about its intentions and commitment to the rules-based international order. Although by now, quite frankly, we should have realized that China plays by its own rules. This is perhaps most obviously evident in the growing tensions over issues such as the South China Sea, where China's territorial claims and even militarization and creation of islands have fueled regional tensions and led to increased military spending by neighboring countries. In addition to creating extreme tensions over crucial things such as fishing rights, where in places with large populations such as Southeast Asia, you need all the food, especially nutritious food like fish, to feed your people. Furthermore, China's Belt and Road Initiative, while aimed at promoting regional connectivity and economic development, has also been criticized for creating unsustainable debt burdens for participating countries and for promoting countries' strategic interests at the expense of local concerns. China is right now being accused of a form of neo-colonialism, in which they make these other nations so dependent on China that it's almost like China owns them or controls them. This gives China such outsized influence that it's almost like a colony of China. Moreover, China's human rights record, particularly in its relation to treatment of ethnic minorities such as the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, Tibetans, or Outer Mongolians, and its crackdown on political dissent in Hong Kong has drawn international condemnation and tarnished the country's global image. Accused of and condemned by the US and dozens of others for genocide, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and most other crimes in the book. Its policy of forced assimilation and indoctrination of minorities using concentration camps, slave labor, forced sterilization, and brainwashing and political indoctrination has resulted in more than 3 million ethnic Uyghur Muslims alone, as well as countless other minorities being falsely imprisoned and stripped of their culture and heritage. Whether they are used for slave labor to make cotton, solar panels, the cell phone you have in your pocket, or the clothes you may have on your back right now, or even to have their organs harvested and sold to wealthy, aging Chinese citizens, or are forcibly taken as children, brainwashed and stripped of their culture, or in some cases are simply exterminated. China views its ethnic minorities who don't conform to the government as threats to their power, and thus seeks to brutally solve this problem. Its increasing use of technology for surveillance and control, both domestically and abroad, has raised concerns about privacy and the potential for abuse of power, which should not even be a question in such a totalitarian police state such as China. Able to keep track of where their citizens are, what they say, buy, write about, who they talk to, and pretty much everything else 24/7, 365, China holds a stranglehold on its population for a reason: history. Chinese history is defined by peasant revolts where the oppressed masses rise up against the tyrant in power, and Beijing will do anything and everything in its power to becoming just another page in that book. They know the power of peasant revolutions, for it was a peasant revolution that brought the Chinese Communist Party to power. Finally, in terms of China, the ongoing trade and technological competition with the United States, as well as growing concerns about China's economic practices and intellectual property theft, as well as their brutal crackdowns on democracy and freedom protesters and activists, have contributed to the emergence of a more confrontational and competitive relationship between the two countries, which has escalated significantly since the US condemned China for taking over control of Hong Kong, and when US officials have met with various Taiwanese officials and delegates. This rivalry has the potential to shape the future global order and could even exacerbate existing tensions and divisions, with significant implications for global stability and cooperation. This theft of intellectual property is especially significant, as much of China's innovation in the fields of today were initially made, or at the very least based upon, intellectual property that the Chinese stole from other nations or forced companies to hand over so that they could then use and expand upon it themselves without having to put in much of the base work that had already been done, that they would have had to do had they not stolen that intellectual property. However, despite all of their challenges, China's economic, military, and technological capabilities continue to grow, and the country is almost certainly destined to remain a major player in global affairs for the foreseeable future. However, its ability to navigate the complex and evolving geopolitical landscape while addressing its internal challenges and managing its relationships with other major powers in a very traditional Chinese society will be critical in determining its future trajectory and its status as a global superpower. Now, while it's one thing for me to narrate this information to you from behind a computer in my basement, why don't we ask someone with much more experience with Russia and China than I have? In fact, he's met with Xi Jinping more than 30 times and Vladimir Putin more than 40 times, and has even led a country bordering both nations that has been struggling against Russian and Chinese interference and exploitation for centuries, especially in the most recent decades. Mongolia was a communist client state of the Soviet Union for 70 years until the transition to democracy in 1992 following the revolution. And before that, was recently independent from China when it broke away in 1911 when the Chinese Qing dynasty collapsed and the most recent Chinese Civil War began. President Sakhayin Elbegdorj is the former two-term prime minister and former two-time president of Mongolia. As one of the leaders of the peaceful and extremely dangerous movement to free Mongolia from communism and bring democracy to his people, President Elbegdorj has often been described as the Thomas Jefferson of Mongolia for all of the work that he has done to secure and found stable democracy and freedom in his home country. As the seventh son of a nomadic herdsman, he grew up in Mongolia's nomadic culture, the very heart of its national identity, which emphasizes individuality and freedom, in which the communists had actively worked to combat. He has spent his life trying to rid Mongolia of foreign manipulation, exploitation, and interference, and influence as well from Russia and China, and has traveled and worked all around the world, helping to build democracy in other countries as they take their first steps into freedom. Even speaking in North Korea about the importance of democracy and freedom. More recently, however, he was appointed as a member of the Elders, a small group founded by Nelson Mandela, comprised of the world's foremost statesmen whom are the most committed to human rights and democratic ideals. President Elbegdorj also recently moved the doomsday clock up to 90 seconds to midnight at a ceremony in Washington, D.C. as part of his new role at the Elders. And it was during this ceremony that he stayed with my family for a week, and I very, very fortunately got to interview him on this very topic. I am extraordinarily lucky and fortunate enough to have been able to talk to him off camera for hours and hours and gain a really, really, truly unique insight into this topic and geopolitics as a whole from a person who probably knows it best. Now, here's some of the highlights. Mr. President, thank you so much for making time for me today.
Thank you, Grayden. Okay, I'm happy to be here with you.
And so, my first question for you is, can you tell me about your foreign policy strategy and how it had related to Mongolia's relationship with its neighbors, Russia and China?
That's actually now our constitution. Since we adopted in 1992, now it's almost 31 years old. Foreign policy. First is neighborly good relations with neighbors, and also open policy to all other countries. And we regard all other countries actually our third neighbor. And the most priority, of course, to our neighbors. Yeah.
And my second question on the list is, how do you envision Mongolia's role in the international community?
You know, Mongolia is an open country. Why we choose democracy and openness? We want to really relate, really have a great relations with any country on the world stage. But of course, we want to have more relations with open, freedom-loving people throughout the world. That's the most important thing for Mongolia's foreign policy. Yeah.
Mr. President, what do you think are some of Russia and China's strategic and economic interests in Mongolia?
Yeah, they have their interests, and there are, in terms of economy, there are two challenges. Russia actually more commodity economy. I think they export to China all similar assets, all similar mining products, like we can export to that. Yes. Because of that, we see Russia in terms of the market, Russia, Mongolia, it's competitors. But China is biggest market, and before, during communism, our economic relations mostly relate with Russia, now mostly with China. Most important thing to balance means that we need bring more direct investments other than Russia and China. That is focus.
And can you speak to some of the steps that they had taken to expand their influence in Mongolia?
They are, of course, through economic relations, economic means, they want to expand. And you know that Mongolia has the longest border with China, 4,700 kilometers.
Wow.
That's quite long. And with Russia, 3,800 kilometers long. We are just connected by mountains and, you know, prairie and Gobi, everything we connected, and the rivers and all. And because of that, of course, their interest gonna be there, but we need to negotiate fairly with them, and that's our national interest. Yeah.
And they have taken some actions to undermine democracy in Mongolia, correct?
Yes, we know that what kind of government in China or in Russia, all people know that. And Mongolia is only democracy between Russia and China since 1990. And we are still surviving. I usually say that Mongolia is the democratic anchor in the East. And that's really important. We like our role in our region.
And then my next question for you is that you just raised, along with some of the other members of the elders, you just raised the doomsday clock to 90 seconds to midnight. What do you think are some of the contributing factors to that?
Yeah, contributing factors, there are mostly three of them. Of course, conflicts in Ukraine, and more conflicts related with the nuclear deals. You know, there are nuclear big powers actually rushing for the development of the new weapons, and also that war and all those things are one. Second is biodiversity loss or everything related with the climate change. Now we see the climate crisis worldwide. Third one is the pandemic, and that's those three things. And because of that, actually, the doomsday clock moved to 90 seconds. That's closer ever it had been.
Wow.
And that's the wake-up call for everyone, and also decision makers. Yeah.
And can you give any insights into either Putin's Russia or Xi's China, coming from somebody who has met both of them dozens of times?
I think we have to put our values related with human rights, and as an authoritarian government, they have many things to hide. I think more exposure and more tough stand what we are standing in terms of the human rights, in terms of the promoting worldwide peace and freedom. That's very important.
And currently, Vladimir Putin is invading Ukraine, as we all know, and committing terrible atrocities throughout the country. If you could give one message to either to the Ukrainian people or to the world about the importance of freedom and democracy, what do you think?
I already gave that. Actually, Ukrainians are fighting not only for their democracy, for their interests. They are fighting for global peace, for the global movement, for freedom. And the other thing, of course, we need to support Ukraine. We need to help them. It's a war not only between Russia and Ukraine. It's war between free world, freedom-loving people, and autocratic world. I think we have no right to lose. Because of that, we have to support. From us, Ukraine needs unwavering support. Yeah.
And my last question for you, Mr. President, is that currently in Mongolia there is a backslide from democracy and back into communism.
Yeah.
Can you speak to either some of the steps that you're taking or the Mongolian people are taking to combat that?
Of course, combat that best hope is our people. I really believe that our democracy is grassroots democracy, and people believe that, and they don't want to lose that. If we lose democracy, we will lose our independence, everything. And because of that, when how we are surviving, there are real change come from our neighbors, and also inside those people, since the autocratic and communist-minded people is still there. It's still that old communist party is still ruling in Mongolia and everywhere. But people are fighting every day. I think we need to fight every day for democracy and raise our voices and unite for that common cause. And through that, we are just surviving there. Thank you.
And I actually have just one follow-up. You led the revolution and change from communism to democracy. Are you seeing kind of the same atmosphere in Mongolia that you're seeing now, with people wanting democracy instead of communism?
But there are, I think, two trends. Of course, there are just brand new generation, who did not live, who did not have any experience with the communism, with the real atrocities with communism. Because of that, they tend to also value that socialism may be a good choice, and more communism maybe was good thing, and that's really bad. And because of that, we have to educate people, and we have to tell them what is communism, what kind of the danger they represent, and that's important thing to do.
Okay. Thank you so much,
Good.
Mr. President.
Thank you.
I know you have to get to the airport, so I'll let you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I personally don't want to overanalyze the president's words or interpret them for you, much less possibly misconstrue his own thoughts in a way he did not intend. So I'll allow each and every listener to draw their own conclusions from his wise and powerful words. And now, finally, in terms of superpowers, let's discuss the United States. The decline of American power can be attributed to a combination of domestic and international factors. Domestically, the United States is facing a number of challenges that have weakened its ability to project power and influence abroad. These challenges include deepening political polarization, income inequality, racial tensions, and crumbling infrastructure, and a decline in its manufacturing industries. The country's political system has become increasingly dysfunctional, to say the least, with partisan gridlock preventing the implementation of effective policy solutions to address these challenges. A for profit media industry has become focused on inflaming tensions through subtly and not so subtly framing, excluding, and manipulating information in a way that fits their own goals and therefore generates profit. The ideological echo chamber that many Americans find themselves in these days makes them less likely to engage with the other side or even agree on common policy, while each side will point to the other and say, "We're tolerant and you aren't." In reality, both are just as bad. This frustration with the status quo and the subsequent reactionary movements that spawned up on both sides has led to a decline in trust in public institutions and a growing sense of disillusionment with the political process. Internationally, the United States has faced criticism for its handling of recent conflicts and its retreat from multilateralism. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as the ongoing war on terror, have cost the country trillions of dollars and have raised questions about the effectiveness of its military interventions and its commitment to promoting democracy and human rights. The disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan also raised significant concerns about the US's effectiveness as a fighting force and was exploited by foreign adversaries for large amounts of propaganda. Additionally, the equipment left behind is valued in the tens of billions of dollars and is currently being used by the Taliban for whatever purpose they may see fit. And, in fact, some of it has even landed up on the international arms market. Moreover, the United States has faced challenges to its leadership in the liberal international order, as other countries have now started to begin questioning its commitments to free trade, multinational organizations, and international cooperation. This has been exacerbated by the rise of nationalist and populist movements within the United States and abroad, which have questioned the value of international engagement and have advocated for a more inward looking approach to foreign policy. Those groups, in turn, have been exacerbated by, on the other side, the globalist faction who seek to prioritize others at the expense of the nation itself. So, in the United States, there is a large culture war between the US's historical precedent of more isolationism versus the more recent precedent of lots of foreign cooperation, intervention, and globalism. In addition to this, the growing competition with China and Russia, as well as the emergence of new global challenges such as climate change, cyber warfare, and pandemics, all shockingly new and, in terms of pandemic, shockingly old and yet somehow always shockingly new, have exposed the limitations of American power and have raised questions about its ability to shape the future global order and even to maintain the status quo as it is right now. However, despite these challenges, the United States remains the world's largest economy and most powerful military force by far, and its cultural, scientific, and technological influence continues to be felt around the world. However, its ability to address its domestic challenges and to adapt to the evolving geopolitical landscape will be critical in determining its future status as a global superpower. The world order has been built up by and around the United States, and even though we've become complacent and allowed ourselves to, and I'm not going to pull punches here, to grow weak while other countries have seized their own opportunities, the US will continue to remain the focal point of world events due to the weight that its name carries. The sheer economic and military capacity, however diminished from what it was before the Cold War ended, and its advanced technological capabilities, as well as the web of alliances that the US has built up around itself. Put simply, the US will continue to remain relevant and powerful because it is the US. The name recognition there, especially, and has all the benefits of decades of being at the top of the food chain under its belt. Now that we've examined the decline of the traditional global superpowers, it's also important to consider the countries that are emerging as rising stars on the world stage. We'll focus on 5 countries that are poised to become significantly more important in the coming years: India, Indonesia, Nigeria, Brazil, and Germany. Now we're going to examine each of these countries in more detail. Note that this isn't a permanent list or me saying that only these countries will become more powerful, but rather some of the more interesting possibilities out there. There are loads and loads of other countries that are poised to become significantly more important, such as, for example, Denmark. Under the Greenland ice, which is now melting, there's rare earth minerals, and they will control probably the most vital sea route on the planet. Or Argentina, in which the Patagonia holds extensive rare earth minerals that will become crucial to a future in which solar panels play an extremely important role in energy production. South Africa is another one, or Turkey, Saudi Arabia. The list goes on and on. There are so many countries with so much potential, but here are 5 that I think could really be something special. First, let's talk about India. With a population of over 1.4 billion people and a rapidly growing economy, India is well positioned to become a major player in global affairs. Its young and growing workforce is expected to surpass that of China in just a few months, if not already. India's economy has been diversifying in recent years, with a growing emphasis on the services and technology in sectors. This has helped to create new employment opportunities and has spurred innovation, further boosting the country's growth prospects. The country is also investing heavily in its infrastructure, which will be essential in accommodating its expanding population, which isn't expected to slow down anytime soon, as well as its continuing economic growth. India's strategic location in the Indian Ocean and its historical and cultural ties to the countries of South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East provide it with a unique opportunity to exert its influence in these regions. As India continues to strengthen its military capabilities and expand its diplomatic presence, its role in regional and global security affairs, especially as a counterweight to China in the region, is almost certainly likely to grow. Furthermore, India's commitment to democracy and its status as the world's largest democracy set it apart from other emerging autocratic powers like China or Russia. However, India also faces significant challenges, including widespread poverty, inadequate infrastructure, and environmental degradation. Addressing these challenges and ensuring inclusive growth will be critical in determining India's ability to capitalize on its potential and becoming leading global power, maybe even taking over China's spot of where it is now. Additionally, India's complex relationship with its neighbors, particularly China and Pakistan, will continue to shape the regional security environment and could pose challenges to the country's rise, especially with the threat of a nuclear confrontation between the 3 ever present, however unlikely. Next up, let's discuss Indonesia. As the world's 4th most populous country and the largest economy in Southeast Asia, India is another rising star on the world stage. The country's abundant natural resources, including oil, gas, and minerals, have fueled its economic growth, while its expanding middle class is driving increased domestic consumption and investment. Indonesia's location at the crossroads of the Indian and Pacific Oceans and its holding of crucial straits, such as the Straits of Malacca, where a significant portion of global trade passes through, are of extreme benefit to Indonesia. This position has led the country to assume a more active role in regional security affairs, especially anti-piracy, including participating in multinational military exercises and pursuing closer defense ties with countries like the United States, Australia, and Japan. Indonesia has also made significant progress in recent years in strengthening its democratic institutions and addressing issues of governance and corruption. The country's successful transition from authoritarian rule to democracy has bolstered its international reputation and has provided it with a platform to promote democratic values and human rights in the region. However, Indonesia also faces a number of challenges that could constrain its rise. The country's infrastructure remains underdeveloped, and it will need significant investment to accommodate its growing population and support continued economic growth. Additionally, Indonesia is grappling with the impacts of climate change, which pose a major threat to its coastal communities and agriculture sector. Moreover, Indonesia's political landscape is marked by deep social, class, and religious divisions, which all have the potential to undermine its stability and democratic processes, and the progress of the nation as a whole. Addressing these issues and fostering greater social cohesion will be essential in ensuring Indonesia's continued rise as a global power, if not at the very least a significant regional one. Now, let's turn our attention to Nigeria. As Africa's most populous country and as its largest economy, Nigeria has the potential to become a major player in global affairs. The country's vast oil reserves have long been the mainstay of its economy, but in recent years, Nigeria has made efforts to diversify its economy, investing in sectors such as agriculture, manufacturing, and information technology. This diversification, coupled with a young and growing population, exploding, really, has the potential to drive significant economic growth in the coming decades. With a current population of 215 million, 415 by 2050, and 800 million by 2100, this skyrocketing population will be essential to economic growth. Nigeria's strategic location on the Gulf of Guinea and its historical and cultural ties to other West African countries provide it with a unique opportunity to exert influence in the region. Its role in regional security, as well as its participation in international peacekeeping missions, has helped to enhance its global standing. Moreover, Nigeria has made progress in recent years in addressing issues of governance and corruption, although significant challenges still remain, as corruption is still deeply embedded into the country. Nigeria's commitment to democracy and its status as the largest democracy in Africa make it an important player in the promotion of democratic values and human rights on the continent. However, just as any other nation on this list, and any other nation in general, Nigeria also faces a significant number of challenges that will constrain its rise. The country is grappling with widespread poverty, inadequate infrastructure, and a lack of access to basic services such as education, healthcare, and even electricity and clean water. These challenges are further exacerbated by high levels of income inequality and a growing youth unemployment crisis. Unless Nigeria can solve these issues and expand its basic infrastructure, job opportunities, and agricultural capacity, the hundreds of millions to be born there in the coming decades will not be future opportunities for success, but simply more mouths to feed in a country already rife with food insecurity and poverty. In addition, Nigeria is confronted with a range of security threats, including the ongoing insurgency by the terrorist group Boko Haram, the group that frequently kidnaps and holds schoolgirls hostage for ransom, as well as communal violence and militancy in the Niger Delta region. Addressing these security challenges and fostering greater social cohesion will be essential in ensuring Nigeria's continued rise as a global power, although it will be extremely difficult with the hundreds of ethnic groups each having very complex pasts, to say the least, with all the others. Now, next, let's examine Brazil. As the largest country in South America and the region's leading economy, Brazil has long been seen as a potential global power. Its 215 plus million strong population and vast natural resources, including agricultural land, minerals, and freshwater reserves, provide it with a strong foundation for economic growth and the space and means in which to do so. Moreover, its strategic location in the heart of the continent gives it a central role in regional affairs. Brazil has also sought to expand its influence globally through its participation in international organizations and initiatives such as the BRICS group of emerging economies, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and the G20. The country has made significant efforts as well to promote regional integration and cooperation, as well as expand the participation of its neighbors. In and through organizations like the Union of South American Nations and the Southern Common Market. However, Brazil faces significant obstacles on its rise as a world power and as a greater voice on the world stage. The country's political landscape has been marred by corruption scandals and political instability, which have eroded public trust in institutions and undermined its international reputation. Additionally, Brazil's economy has struggled with slow growth and high levels of inequality, while its infrastructure remains significantly underdeveloped. Brazil faces pressing environmental challenges, including deforestation, pollution, and land degradation, all of which threaten, either directly or indirectly, its vast Amazon rainforest and have global implications for climate change and biodiversity. Addressing these challenges, issues, and problems, and fostering sustainable development will be crucial in determining Brazil's future as a potential global power. Lastly, let's discuss Germany. As Europe's largest economy and a key player in the European Union, Germany has long been an influential actor on the world stage. The country's strong industrial base, technological prowess, and commitment to innovation have driven its economic success and enabled it to maintain a global competitive edge. Germany's leadership in the European Union, as well as its participation in international organizations such as the G7 and NATO, has allowed it to play a central role in shaping international policy and addressing global challenges, such as climate change, migration, and trade, even if it does so more behind the scenes than out front in ways such as the US and China do. Moreover, Germany's commitment to democracy, human rights, and the rule of law has bolstered its international reputation and provided it with a platform to promote these values globally. The country has also been a major contributor to international development efforts, providing significant financial and technical assistance to countries in need. Germany really has a lot of things going for it. It has the biggest population and economy in Europe. It has a large industrial base and motivated workforce, an extremely motivated workforce, really, that's also highly skilled and very professional. And it also has huge untapped potential that remains untapped because of actions untaken and policies not pursued over guilt, over its cause, over its role as the cause of World War II, and a resulting sense of a commitment to learning their lesson, in terms of Germany being more assertive internationally, as was drilled into West Germans during denazification. However, some in Germany are now publicly saying, a huge, unprecedented, unthinkable step from even just a year ago, that since Germany is no longer a threat to Europe or its own people, it must accept its responsibility as a keystone in European defense and security. Germany, they say, must come to terms with its past so that it can step into the future and not be held back anymore. However, Germany faces a number of challenges that could impact its future as a global power. The country's aging population and low birth rates, similar problems in many other European countries, and indeed around the world, could lead to labor shortages and slow economic growth in the coming decades, along with the problem of having a lot of unused housing and infrastructure that was constructed for when a population was much larger than it is, in the future present, I guess I'll say. Additionally, Germany's military was seriously neglected after the fall of the Berlin Wall due to over-reliance on the US and guilt over World War II, leading to the present situation of basic shortages of everything from uniforms and ammunition, and yet strangely also having some of the best tank corps and airmen in the world. With the defense budget being frequently cut to pay for social programs or debt repayments, basic maintenance and modernization was not done, and a lack of oversight has caused stockpiles to be siphoned off and degraded. The demoralized military, feeling ignored by the government and shamed by their people, was boosted after the invasion of Ukraine by an immediate €100 billion investment, plus a significantly increased defense budget that goes above and beyond the NATO target goals, from below where they actually are now. But the decades of neglect and complacency has left not only the German armed forces, the Bundeswehr, but also many other European countries' militaries as well, years and years behind where they should be, with a long, winding road ahead to recovery. It does not just take a few years to undo these decades and decades of neglect. It takes decades to undo decades. Additionally, Germany, and indeed Europe as a whole, is grappling with the complex task of integrating an extremely large number of migrants and refugees who have arrived in the country and continent in recent years, fleeing from situations mainly in the Middle East, which has sparked great social and political tensions and debate as these new arrivals in their country have started to, at least in some areas, disrupt the native culture there. Germany also faces significant geopolitical challenges, particularly in relation to its relationship with Russia and the broader security environment in Europe. As a key member of NATO and the EU, Germany will need to navigate these challenges while maintaining its commitment to multilateralism and international cooperation. Each of these rising powers, India, Indonesia, Nigeria, Brazil, and Germany, has the potential to play a more significant role in global affairs in the coming years, alongside every other nation that will become more important on the world stage, whether it's due to something like sheer force of population, such as Nigeria, or a highly skilled workforce in a strategically important place, such as Germany. However, their specific ability to capitalize on their potential and overcome the various economic, social, and geopolitical challenges, unique and yet all too common, that they face, will determine their future status on the world stage. As we can see, the future of global power dynamics is very uncertain. It's extremely dynamic and complex. And the traditional superpowers are now facing decline and new players emerging with the potential to reshape the world order. It will be truly fascinating to observe how these countries navigate the challenges ahead and what their rise means for global stability and cooperation. It's truly a time that we live in that we will be able to watch all of this unfold and the world turned on its head as we progress throughout our own lifetimes. Now, onto a more somber topic. Let's move on to our final question. What war is most likely to break out in the coming future? A bit blunt, but put most simply and most clearly. Now, while many might say Taiwan and China, China views Taiwan as its unfinished business from 1949. I disagree with this because China's economy and agriculture is dependent on imports from the US and exports to the US and the West. An invasion of Taiwan would not only collapse the economy of China and the US, but the entirety of the world as a whole. A collapse of the global economy would not be worth it, especially from China's point of view. They'd much rather be alive and have Taiwan as a convenient boogeyman, a scapegoat for all of its problems, than trying to wage a war that could lead to something the likes of which has never been before seen on this planet and possibly end civilization. Now, while that might be a little dramatic, sure, it's also worth considering the fact that Taiwan, a well-fortified and highly motivated island nation, 100 miles from mainland China, has been preparing for a Chinese invasion for the past 75 years. And China's military has never fought a battle since the end of the Korean War. As a reminder, that's 75 years they've been preparing, while Ukraine has really only been preparing for 8 years. So China is really taking a good hard look at Russia's current situation and determining, is this worth it? Probably not. And especially the fact that since the US, we may defend them, we may not, that's part of the picture. But another huge part of the picture is that because Taiwan is an island nation, they don't have a land border with Ukraine like Russia does. Any invasion by China would be a naval one, and it would be on a bloodbath on a scale that would make D-Day look almost like a walk in the park. With all due respect to D-Day, to those who served on D-Day, the casualties there would be in the tens and tens of thousands, as China would just keep on throwing men onto the beachheads until something happened. Instead, the most probable war, in my opinion, would occur between Egypt and Ethiopia. First, let's discuss this entire situation. Ethiopia is currently building the Grand Renaissance Dam on the Nile, close to its border with Sudan. Now, this Egypt views as an existential threat. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam will undeniably change not only the Nile, but every single country that the Nile flows along. Egypt is highly dependent on the Nile for its water supply, with approximately 95% of its fresh water coming from the river. The construction of the Renaissance Dam has raised significant concerns in Egypt, as it fears that the dam, especially during its filling period, during which a significant amount of water is held back from release so that the reservoir behind the dam can fill up. It fears that this could, and not only could, but will reduce the flow of water downstream, leading to water scarcity, electricity shortages, and significantly impacting its agricultural sector. And Egypt's concerns aren't unfounded either, as studies have shown that the dam could potentially reduce the flow of the Nile by up to 30 to 35% during the initial filling phase, which could last anywhere from 5 to 15 years. This reduction in water flow could have devastating consequences for Egypt's economy, as agriculture is a significant source of employment and a crucial sector for the country's food security. Lake Nasser, Egypt's largest reservoir formed by the Aswan High Dam, would also produce significantly less electricity due to the lower water levels that would occur, causing blackouts all across Egypt. Egypt would be facing less food and less water for its already hungry and thirsty people of 105 million, less electricity for its developing populace, and the desertification of the Nile Delta, as localized droughts in those regions would occur as the main river drops and branches of the delta dry up entirely. It has long been said that Egypt is the Nile, and that the Nile is Egypt. Any threat to the Nile is a threat to the very existence of Egypt itself. Egypt has been built up all along the Nile, and Egypt has relied on the Nile for its entire survival in almost every industry. So there is nothing more important to Egypt than the Nile. Moreover, Egypt's growing population and the increasing demand for water due to urbanization and industrialization have only exacerbated these concerns. The country is already facing water scarcity, with the per capita water availability dropping below the United Nations' threshold for absolute water scarcity. This situation could lead to social unrest and political instability, as water scarcity has historically been a catalyst for conflict in the region. Egypt also cites an 1897 treaty with Britain, further reaffirmed in the 19 teens. The treaty with Britain gives Egypt the right to veto any development project on the Nile, even ones outside its borders. While other Nile nations have respected this so far, Ethiopia has rejected this as nonsense. It says that the treaty is illegitimate and illegal. Egypt fears that if Ethiopia is allowed to get away with this flagrant violation of their treaty, that other countries may also start ignoring the country and damming the Nile as a result, further reducing water flow to Egypt and compounding on all of the problems previously stated. Now, let's discuss Ethiopia's motivations for constructing the dam. The primary reason for the construction of the Renaissance Dam is to generate electricity, as Ethiopia has ambitious plans for economic growth and development. The dam, once completed, will be the largest hydropower project in Africa, capable of generating over 6,000 megawatts of electricity. Ethiopia, as one of the fastest growing economies in the world, has been struggling to meet its energy needs. The dam is seen as a critical part of the country's plan to become a middle-income nation and expand its manufacturing and industrial sectors. Also, the Ethiopian government has plans to export surplus electricity to neighboring countries, which could potentially generate significant amounts of revenue and improve regional connectivity, as well as lifting not only Ethiopian people, but the surrounding people in other nations as a whole out of poverty, or at least making their living situation significantly better. In addition to the economic benefits, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has also become a symbol of national pride for Ethiopia. The project, which is being funded primarily by Ethiopian citizens through government bonds and donations, is seen as a testament to the country's self-reliance, abilities, and determination to overcome its historical dependence on foreign aid. So, in summary, for Egypt, the Renaissance Dam means less water, less food, less electricity, and more poverty, and for Ethiopia it means more water, more food, more electricity, and less poverty. An existential threat to one and an existential necessity to the other. This isn't to mention Sudan, between Egypt and Ethiopia, would also face significant problems, many of which would bear similarity to Egypt, and would almost certainly side with Egypt in any potential conflict should one break out. Hopefully not, though. And considering the stakes involved for both Egypt and Ethiopia, the risk of conflict over the Grand Ethiopian Dam is a real concern. Egypt has repeatedly stressed that it views the Nile as a matter of national security and survival, and its leaders have not ruled out the possibility of military action to protect the country's water supply and lifeblood. Indeed, its current president, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, has said that it is, quote, a matter of life and death, and that, quote, no options are at the table. None at all, end quote. And former Egyptian President Anwar Sadat was famously quoted as saying, "We are not going to wait to die of thirst in Egypt. We'll go to Ethiopia and die there." End quote. See, talks of the dam have been going on for decades, and it wasn't until the past 10 years that they really came to fruition and Ethiopia actually started building it. Before, it was merely a threat that the Ethiopians were making, while now it is a reality. More recently, former US President Donald Trump, while in office, said that Egypt may indeed have no choice but to airstrike the dam if water supplies are drastically reduced, and it's due to the sheer amount of suffering that it would cause on the Egyptian people. Other countries haven't been so forward in saying that that may be necessary, but they have said that Egypt will probably have to do something if it should get this bad. Meanwhile, a war between Egypt and Ethiopia could lead to significant loss of life, displacement of populations, and economic disruption, further destabilizing an already fragile region. After all, Ethiopia remains adamant about its right to develop its resources and improve the lives of its citizens. Not to mention that it's kind of getting a kick out of sticking it to Egypt after all these years. In a potential conflict, the victor, if one can ever really be a victor in war, would likely be Egypt. Having a modern, powerful military with US and European built tanks, planes, weapons, and ships, as well as modern tactics, Egypt has the means and will to either launch a full scale invasion of Ethiopia through a likely cooperative Sudan, or simply launch a cruise missile or fighter jet squadron to take out the dam. Although it is worth mentioning that a full scale invasion would be much, much less likely than a targeted strike, due to all of the invasions that marching an army through the desert might take. Ethiopia, on the other hand, is currently in the midst of a civil war and has mostly leftover Soviet equipment, such as, Soviet tanks, planes, lots of old guns and artillery pieces that are no match for the modern tools that Egypt has, not to mention a lack of ways to respond to Egyptian aggression, since Ethiopia is landlocked. And since Egypt does have a shoreline, it also has a remarkably strong navy, including helicopter and mini aircraft carriers that can, go to the Horn of Africa and strike using those ships as bases instead of having to fly from Egypt over Sudan to Ethiopia. They can strike directly from the Red Sea itself. So, in a military engagement, Egypt would win militarily, simply due to the fact that their military is so much better, and Ethiopia just wouldn't really either have a way to respond or even to threaten Egypt, especially because Ethiopia is right now in the midst of a brutal civil war. So while Egypt would win militarily, the diplomatic and political consequences would be dire. So, as we draw to a close and look ahead to the year 2050, it's difficult to predict with certainty which countries will lead the world order. However, based on current trends and analysis, we can expect that India, Indonesia, Nigeria, Brazil, and Germany will play increasingly significant roles in shaping global politics and the balance of power. However, as we've also discussed, the future of global power dynamics is far from certain, as it's a hyperdynamic scenario. The ability of these rising powers to overcome the various economic, social, and geopolitical challenges they face will be a key determinant of the future status in the international community. From addressing widespread poverty and inadequate infrastructure to navigating complex regional security environments and fostering sustainable development, these countries will need to demonstrate strong leadership and effective governance if they are to assume a more prominent role in global affairs. Furthermore, the shifting balance of power raises important questions about the future of international cooperation and the global order. With traditional superpowers in decline and new players emerging, the potential for increased competition and even conflict is heightened. This underscores the importance of maintaining and strengthening multilateral institutions such as the United Nations, the World Trade Organizations, and regional organizations as well, like the European Union and the African Union, to facilitate dialogue, cooperation, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. While they often get a lot of flack, sometimes well-deserved, sometimes not, about not doing anything, these types of institutions also provide an absolutely critical and crucial platform where countries can meet and essentially talk things out. If it wasn't there, the other side might just simply not pick up the phone. So even though they may not appear to do anything, the sheer amount of communication they provide to each other, along with the weight their name carries, really proves that they are overall beneficial and they do help situations, even though to an outside observer, especially to at a passing glance, they might not seem to be very effective. Also, the decline of the Big Three and the emergence of new global actors represents a significant shift in the international landscape. And as we move further into the 21st century, it will be fascinating, just simply and utterly fascinating, to observe not only these countries, but the world as a whole, how humanity navigates the challenges and opportunities that comes with their rise, and what this means for global stability, cooperation, and progress for our species as a whole. Now, I hope that this has provided you with a deeper understanding of the factors driving these changes in global power dynamics, even just a glimpse to the tip of the iceberg of the factors. I could really go on for hours or days, but at the very least, I hope that this glimpse has prompted you to think about the implications of these shifts for the world at large. It's important for all of us to stay informed and engaged in these developments, especially from multiple trustworthy sources, as they will have a profound impact on the course of global events in the years to come, and therefore a direct impact on you. Our current world order is hanging on by a thread, that thread being a fear of what might come. But until that day comes, if it ever does, stay curious and keep questioning the world around you. Thank you.